There's so much to read here, I don't understand what to do. I know to press the A button, I've played this game before. All these hours later and they're still giving me tutorials. Stop holding my hand, I can figure this out on my own. I like this game, but gosh darn it, why can't I skip this beginning part? This is taking forever. When does this game become fun or good or whatever? Many of you who have played games as much as I have, actually more so, may have muttered or uttered any one of those phrases or something similar, and very likely in the opening minutes or hours of a game. Something that should be a no-brainer in game development is to figure out how to hook the player in from the beginning, how to do effective and compelling world building, how to show the player how to play the game, the sometimes dreaded tutorial. On my Video Games for Fun channel, I like to hypothesize on what would be a good game for non-gamers / first-time gamers to play. So to talk about the beginnings and tutorials of games, especially for their potential audience, would actually be an interesting idea. First of all, let's talk about tutorials and instructions. A lot of games back in the old days had little to no on-screen help or button prompts. The controls were generally in the instructions that came with the game, or it was a case of intuition. For example, let's look at Super Mario Bros. The controls aren't given to you on a screen. Even if you don't read the instructions, you can figure out very quickly that the D-pad makes Mario move, and the A button makes him jump, plus there's the B button to make him run faster. You have to make Mario move and jump, and go from point A to point B. It's simple. Anyone can play it. The NES controller has very few buttons, which meant a lot of games were simple to play, but could often be extremely challenging. Then again, Super Mario Bros. Is a 2D platformer, and games of that nature are generally easy to get a grasp of. This is not an adventure game or an RPG. RPGs are generally more complex, but we'll come back to that. What can make or break a tutorial? The show don't tell principle. Games are very much a visual medium with visual cues. Having pictures or videos of a gameplay mechanic can actually be helpful when matching on-screen text. And it's a bonus if the visual cues are also part of the art direction, story, world building, or are potentially humorous. Not introducing too many mechanics even after hours have passed. Very little time at the beginning should be devoted to introducing players to mechanics. It is quite possible that you may get introduced to a completely new idea towards the end of the game for the potential sake of variety, but if a player keeps on getting explanations for how to do things hours after they start a new file, they will probably get overwhelmed. That can be remedied, however, with a log or instruction manual for basics. Just about any contemporary game does not come with an instruction manual. In fact, we're lucky to get something in the package that's 1 page long. A menu that has an option to review gameplay mechanics is always a good reminder. This can also apply to a journal or story menu that details the events of the story so far, just in case you put the game aside for a length of time. Too much text. Text-heavy or long-winded tutorials generally don't work, especially if they pertain to basics such as customizing a character in an RPG. Instead, make the tutorial interactive, instead of involving a lot of reading. How long is this going to be? The story hasn't even really started yet and I'm still learning how to do combat? Even if the amount of text is not necessarily lengthy, you keep on giving me that and I'll want to actually try and do things for myself, or play a different game, or do something else. Any basics that I should keep a note of should not be forgotten. Unless there's an instruction manual or help menu, how am I supposed to keep track of all the basics? What if I come across a certain scenario or objective and I forget how to do a certain thing? Or if I take a break from the game? It is best not to put pretty much everything there is to know about the game at the beginning, and let the player uncover it gradually. Then again, a training course accessible from a menu can be helpful here. Games like the Star Fox games, Deus Ex and Half-Life do this pretty well. Okay then, let's do a list of examples, especially when it comes to optional or skippable tutorials. Lists. I like these. And there will be some seriously good games mentioned here, including The Legend of Zelda or Ocarina of Time, which is, for me, one of my favourite games of all time. But I can't even help noticing its problems. Let's look at the beginning of a game. You have a non-skippable intro that only lasts for a few minutes, which shows Link's nightmare and the Deku Tree telling the fairy Navi to go find Link and tell him to go speak to the Deku Tree. You go out of Link's house and have the option to talk to the Kokiri children, go inside houses, read signs, and so on. You go to the Deku Tree, except the leader, Mida, or is it Mida, tells you that you need a sword and shield. Okay, so we have to explore the forest and find these two things, one of which costs 40 rupees to buy. A lot of the talking and sign reading is completely optional, and you can take your time in getting the sword and shield. This is generally fine and can be done very quickly on a repeat playthrough, but it's with the Deku Tree that there is a bit of a problem. To be fair, the Deku Tree is the first dungeon, and dungeons are the most important part of a game, but the fairy Navi pauses the game almost frequently to explain simple mechanics such as the A button being the action button for almost anything. ranging from opening doors, pushing blocks, even diving underwater. You cannot fast forward through Navi's dialogue. It can be argued that this non-optional thing is more of a problem on a repeat playthrough, and even with Navi's constant pausing to talk, the dungeon can be completed fairly quickly. This was also the first 3D Zelda game, and as such gamers were introduced to mechanics in 1998 that have now become mostly a staple of the franchise and even a fair amount of other games of the action-adventure genre. But since the action button was used fairly frequently before the Deku Tree in mostly optional scenarios, this is not good pacing or a decent tutorial. It's far from being the worst tutorial, but it could have been better if speaking to Navi was optional. Navi could have said her meme-worthy, "Hey, listen" dialogue, and the player could have decided if they wanted to speak to her, something that is mostly done later on in the game, as well as the sequel Majora's Mask with a different fairy. Also, the cutscenes in Ocarina of Time can't be skipped, but that's not part of this discussion. Okay then, so optional tutorials are a good idea then. In Super Mario RPG, you have the option to say no when Toad asks to teach you about battle. Towards the beginning of Final Fantasy VII, you can skip a tutorial about using materia, and there is a character who Cloud talks to in regards to game mechanics, of which there are several. You don't even have to talk to this person, but if you do, there's a lot to read, plus it's not interactive. Even Cloud's other party member Barrett gets more and more agitated the more mechanics you read about. Look at him. Is it hard to design tutorials for RPGs and other games with numerous, potentially complex mechanics? Is that a common theme? Well, there are other genres that have tutorials and can potentially do it better. 3D platformers like the Mario and Banjo-Kazooie games have mostly skippable tutorials. You can read signs in Super Mario 64, but you don't have to. You can ask Bottles the Mole to teach you the early basic moves in Banjo-Kazooie, but thank goodness you can skip that. And even then, all the moves you learned throughout Banjo-Kazooie are there to read about through the molehills in the sequel, Banjo-Tooie, in case you need a reminder, or if Tooie is the first Banjo-Kazooie game you play. You don't have to read these. However, other non-RPG games can still hit stumbling blocks. The 3D Mario games generally have quick skippable tutorials that can also be completed fairly quickly as you progress to the crux of the game. The only time it didn't necessarily happen is Super Mario Sunshine. The sequence where you're taught how to squirt water is not skippable. Granted, it's not a long sequence, but still you can't skip it when you feel like a repeat playthrough. Do I feel like playing Super Mario 64 or even a 2D Mario game at this point? The use of tutorials can also be hated in mostly contemporary games, especially in regards to handholding. Okay, we've got a boss fight here, let's teach you how to use this special move, or do this other thing. Oh, using the special move on that boss makes it super easy. Maybe I wanted to figure that out for myself? It can be argued that it's not limited to contemporary games. Mario & Luigi's Superstar Saga doesn't let you skip the tutorial on how to use your hammer in battle, and I've played this game before. Games that are our favourites, or we can like or are interested in, can occasionally be aggravating, can't they? With the abundance of tutorials in today's games, it can be hard not to feel some nostalgia towards older games that had little to no tutorials, where figuring out how to use a directional pad or stick may as well have been the equivalent of figuring out how to ride a bicycle for the first time. A tutorial in a video game can be the equivalent of that. Understanding how to ride a bike is easy at first, but then there is knowing where to go with it, and safely and properly. Where was I going with my ending to this? Okay, that's where we come on to you people in the comments. What do you think makes a good or bad tutorial? What tutorials out there did you think were, okay, that was cool, or, oh my god, just kill me off like a character in Game of Thrones already? What were the first games you ever played, and how did they utilize tutorials or instructions, if they had any? Feel free to discuss in the comments down below, and have a good day or night, or whatever it is. See you next time!